Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Snapp Tech Podcast. Jasper and I were talking last time about app ecosystems or mobile ecosystems, and we were kind of looking for the third ecosystem in Europe on top of Apple and iOS, or top of Apple iOS and Google Android. We're talking about non-Google Android. We're talking about other alternatives like mobile Linux and so on. But Jasper, you've been engaged with another one, which is the HarmonyOS Next, which is the Huawei's next operating system, which is no longer Android, right? And you've been following them quite closely. Would you like to tell us a little bit about HarmonyOS?
Yeah, that's right. So I dived into that ecosystem probably about, I think it's over 2 years ago now. Got introduced to some of the Huawei team here in Europe by a mutual friend. And at the time, it was just starting to grow, and we were really early. I think we were at HarmonyOS 3 at the time, which 3 was still running a an Android virtual machine. That one was sort of a bridge, really. HarmonyOS is really interesting. I mean, it's an operating system kind of built from the ground up. Apple keeps saying built from the ground up, but so it's a little bit of an overused term. But this one really was built from the ground up. It started out as a research project in the University of Shanghai. Might be slightly wrong on that. Started quite some years ago, and Huawei have been investing in it slowly, and then they really ramped up the investment in it and interest in it when there was the trade split with America that made it kind of impossible for them to put Android on their devices. There's so many interesting things about the operating system. If you just think about what would you do with huge budgets, starting to build a device focused operating system in 2020 something, right? I mean, you would think completely different to the Apple team in a launch of 2007. I mean, that is what now, almost 20 years ago. It's quite shocking, right? So the operating system has really comes from that era, same with Android, right? So they had a real chance to do something new. And a couple of things they did really sensibly, I suppose, was to say, well, back 20 years ago, the smallest device you could imagine was probably your phone, right? You didn't have a huge number of smart devices around the home or on your wrist and all of those sort of things. Actually, I saw an article today of it was basically the end of a USB-C connector, with a little board on top. That's how small you can get things these days. I mean, really the sort of size of a small coin. So what they did is they built this operating system to run not just on phones, but you can really go down to microcontrollers. So you can have them running in speakers or in industrial equipment. This operating system scales up to run on laptop hardware, certainly not server operating system, but it's really designed for, I'd call it the device era, right? Not the phone era, but the device era. And that makes it super interesting. And we can get onto what they're doing to take advantage of that. So that's kind of where I got in. We can talk about a bit more if you want about what we did, but that's the kind of entry point into this topic of HarmonyOS.
So my understanding is that the HarmonyOS, like you say, is like a next generation system. What I've heard from you and other people is that the way you build software is somewhat different in there. And I've been using this kind of comparison of how Firebase was making data between devices easy. And I understood that at least some marketing materials, I don't know how real that is, but the idea of Huawei would be that you don't write just for a phone anymore, but you write on a kind of pervasive ecosystem of devices. And as far as I understand it, the intention of Huawei is not to be just Huawei branded devices. It's not like Apple, everything needs to be Apple, but it's going to be more open, or have I misunderstood something?
No, that's absolutely it. They made some really smart moves, I think. The first thing is they open sourced the operating system. So the core part of it is open sourced within the Open Atom Foundation, which is a big open source foundation in China. So very China focused, but it is open source. Anyone can take that. It's extremely modular. So you can rebuild that operating system with different capabilities. So you say, hey, I want to build something without any Wi-Fi capabilities. Or, hey, I'm building something that's just for a controller with no screen. Okay, I can basically remove all the modules I don't need and build it just for that. So they did a really good job with that. And what that's meant is that third parties can build HarmonyOS based devices. So, there are a range of, some people have built laptops, some people have built smart cameras, like security cameras. Some people have tried to put some things in medical devices. I think there's even a cash or ATM running in the operating system. So it's pretty cool that they did it that way. Now, what makes it even smarter, in my view, is that, again, because they started this, thinking about this carefully, whilst mobile had been around for quite a long time, the interconnectivity between devices is at the heart of the operating system. So if you go back and think about Android and iOS, I mean, certainly when we started building on it, to connect a phone to another piece of hardware was a really unusual thing to do. I mean, you did that with HP, right? Connecting to printers. And back then it was just a really sort of a crazy, new world we were getting into. Today, that's completely standard. So they've got a communication layer built into the operating system that allows you to discover and then send data around between different devices. There's some topics around authentication, security that we'll kind of skip over for today so we don't get caught up in too many details. But it's really designed to be an ecosystem-friendly operating system. Ecosystem being not software necessarily, but devices. One more thing to kind of just add to that is they've been working with this, and not just working with, but being part of this body in China, which is building a different communications protocol to Bluetooth. This thing called SparkLink. Basically, it solves quite a lot of things that are really irritating about Bluetooth. The latency for the connection is pretty slow. The energy demands are pretty high in Bluetooth, so they're addressing that. The data transfer speeds are also not great, so they're addressing that. So they've got this additional communication mechanism. There's some downsides to it, that you need certain chip to be on board on your hardware, so it can't work with everything. But for devices where it works, that's fantastic. I mean, we could have a whole episode just talking about that, but I'll rein myself back.
Yeah, this is cool because the thought about this is that you won't create a third operating system just being another Android. There need to be something that is, and as quite a layman about this, I haven't looked at the technical tech side of things, but where I think about where this idea fits in the mobile app ecosystems in general, the mobile ecosystems in general, this is a thing that Android nor iOS can easily adapt to. This is something that has to be built from ground up to really support a multi-device thing, and that's where the world is going. You shouldn't have to care where your things are. There's a lot of things about, we're talking about Enrique, our CTO, about how he uses LLMs, and he built his own Telegram-based bot to tell him what the LLM is doing on his computer. So he kind of why, if you use LLM tools, why are you tied into a computer? It's not even running on that one, it's running on a server. Why can't I just take my phone and tell the LLM to do the next iteration of the vibe coding or whatever? And this is where the world is going in general. All smart home stuff, all of these kind of things. They are very potent, but only if they work together.
It's quite surprising, actually, how Apple and Google really missed this whole thing, right? I mean, Apple's done a fair bit more in the world of smart homes. And if you're really deep into the ecosystem, you can get the speakers, you can get the TV, you can get various other things. But it's a closed ecosystem, right? You can't get third parties into the Apple connected device ecosystem very easily. Whereas Google, I kind of feel they maybe tried to leave it up to the OEMs. Like Samsung, I think, have had a reasonably good go at it. I think Xiaomi have done a pretty big effort on devices. It's a device company more than just a phone company or a car company these days. Generally, I feel that those two main players have stopped really driving the operating system and connectivity at some point. And now it's kind of I wouldn't even think about going to either one of those things to have a multi-device experience, to be honest.
You had, like, in early phase of Android, you had this kind of hint of, there was a spark of intelligence in Wear OS or Android Wearable OS, whatever it's called today. It was very, very easy to write code that was sending some data between the phone and the watch. But then that kind of blew apart a little bit, and was also the other thing that was very innovative from Google's perspective initially was Chromecast. And that kind of the idea that things like your music follows you through your house and things like that were very good. Unfortunately, in a very typical Google fashion. They build one version and they never build a second version, and it never works. Like my Android TV
Crazy.
simply cannot connect to my Android phone. So it's just baffling to me that it doesn't work. But yeah, these are all things that are kind of built on top of old type of an operating system as an afterthought.
That's it.
So if you build from ground up, you can build something that is secure, safe, and fast and reliable. And that they have to be. If you have to reconnect all the time, nobody's gonna use it.
So there was quite an amazing case study. I saw this presentation at last year's Mobile World Congress. And this was a Chinese company that creates safety systems for long or big trucks, especially the extra long ones. And the problem with those vehicles is that they're covered in blind spots. There's so many accidents caused by bicycles or cyclists, or motorbikes or whatever, getting into the blind spots of these vehicles. And so you can cover the vehicles in cameras, right? If you drive a modern car, modern electric car, it's got cameras all around it. The problem is that quite a lot of time you have to retrofit an existing truck with all those cameras, and the cabling alone, of all these cameras is a real problem, a really massive problem. But using this very low latency, high speed data connection, it's been able to put cameras all the way around these vehicles. Has now become sort of almost a standard that all of these cameras can speak wirelessly to a central control unit fairly reliably. So that's a kind of an example of outside the consumer world. And I think inside of one of the guys I got to know pretty well works in an industrial setting. And there it's the same thing, right? You've got a lot of potential for having devices reporting data in near real time. You've got operators of equipment or operators of a plant or whatever, being able to connect seamlessly to a whole lot of equipment. It really feels like these guys are thinking a few steps ahead. And it's not just about, hey, I've got a phone and it connects to a smart speaker. That sort of stuff. That feels really childlike by now. So the operating system is interesting because it's connected with some bigger thinking that might not be reality today, but the capabilities are there for it to become reality.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. I think we could have another episode about the technical side.
Sure.
But basically what we discussed last time is, even if you have technically good thing, it's not necessarily very easy to actually create an ecosystem, because there's always this chicken egg problem and return of investment of writing software for a platform that doesn't have users and so on. But it does look like they've gotten quite a bit traction in China, while in Europe it's quite invisible, but China seems to be going right.
Yeah, so I think there was always going to be a challenge, right? I mean, everyone, well, maybe from the outside, I'm not a China expert, first off, right? But there's this perception from the outside that China's a big block that kind of operates in a sort of uniform way. And it really isn't, especially when it comes to digital devices. There's a really strong competition. I mean, Apple in particular, extremely strong in China, extremely strong still. Huawei've really got to create great products at the right price with the right appeal, etc. And they've, I think it's taken them a bit longer to do that than they were expecting. They didn't get help by the fact that there was still this American attempt to reduce availability of chip printing equipment and so forth. So they haven't been able to keep up with in terms of chips and that sort of thing. So in fact, let me share my screen because we kind of got some updates that have been coming out where, the device counts are now growing to a point where it's pretty interesting. So this is an article from just a few days ago, hitting 50 million installations. That's starting to get a sizable number. And coming back to what we're saying about this is running on multiple sorts of devices. This is not 50 million phones. This is 50 million devices of all sorts. So it could be watches, could be phones, could be laptops. They've got laptops with HarmonyOS on them. I think they've even got HarmonyOS in cars. So this is a kind of an aggregate of all of them. But that's pretty big numbers they're starting to get to domestically. So I think that building an ecosystem in China by Huawei in a kind of an era of geopolitical sort of tension, you would thought it would be a slam dunk. It would be like, we can make this happen, no problem. But it's been a longer road, a longer journey than I think was expected. But they're getting there. And I think the consistent effort will pay out, and I think that it will become the predominant ecosystem at some point in the future. I think that the key tipping point might be when some of the other bigger players look to take part in it as well.
Where's the growth coming from? Is it mostly driven by Huawei, or is it coming from externals as well?
At the moment, mostly from Huawei. They've got the supply chains, they've got the retail outlets, they've got contracts with big companies and governments to ship large quantities of devices, and they've got the huge marketing budgets as well. I think the other parts of the ecosystem, my impression, have been early adopters, maybe more niche players, and they've been part of it, but they're not, as I can see yet, driving that adoption. And I think this is the tipping point. I mean, having the open source OS is good, but they really need to start to have larger numbers of non-Huawei branded products coming out. Now, I haven't got my fingers on the pulse of everything that's going on in China, so maybe that's happening already and I'm just not seeing it. But I think they haven't quite hit that point yet, as far as I can see.
Gotcha. I'd like to shift a little bit again. Maybe we could talk about a little bit outside China. I know you have a little bit of visibility in Africa. Maybe that would be interesting to hear what you think Huawei's role in Africa is going to be. But definitely would like to hear, like Western world, especially Europe. Huawei has some of the next HarmonyOS next devices out here. I did buy the watch, whatever, I can't remember, the GT5, whatever it was. I have to say the experience wasn't exactly great. Was somewhat disappointed. The hardware was fine. The software was it felt very outside for what I would do. For as an Android engineer, for example, the fonts were all off. It didn't scale with my accessibility setups, and the registration process was referring to some cybersecurity laws in China, and these kind of things were a little bit scary. But I'd love to hear from you a little bit from what do you think is the take on Africa or Europe? What do you think is gonna happen outside China?
So I think it's still pretty early days. I think that there's a general pattern that I observe with technology and products coming out of China, outside of Huawei, outside of devices and so forth, which is that there's quite a long incubation period inside of China. And it's such a huge market that you can build very, very successful domestic products. By the time they get exported, they've hit a very high level of maturity. So that when we see them, we're kind of shocked. They're like, oh my God, you can see that with some of the vehicles coming out of China. It's like, oh my God, how mature these vehicles are. But what we don't see is like the 4, 5, 6 years worth of product development and releases that have been going on, and the earlier stage products that didn't work quite so perfectly. So I think there's an element of that going on. The HarmonyOS version, I think they've got up to release version 6 just towards the end of last year. So there's a really sort of active development going on, and there's a growth in the ecosystem and developer tools and components and so forth going on and on. So anything that happens outside China at the moment is still fairly at the early-ish days, right? We don't have access to the ecosystem from inside of China very easily. There's a very healthy developer community, but it's based in China. It's not based outside of China. There are a lot of third-party components you could use, but you have to get into the Chinese app development communities and so forth. So all of these things are there, but to access them at the moment is not that easy. And there's a massive effort that would need to take place to make these things sort of external or build kind of international equivalents to some of these things. I don't know what the strategy is. I think even if I did, I wouldn't be able to publicly say it because we're not allowed to talk about those things. But I don't know what the public strategy is coming outside of China. But my perception is that they're not quite there yet with the domestic market, is my perception. A very interesting project where I really first got into contact with HarmonyOS is a project under the Eclipse Foundation that's called Anero. So this is another interesting aspect, which is they've taken the open source operating system from China, from this Open Atom Foundation, and they've basically got a cooperation with 2 open source foundations working together. So the Anero project can commit upstream back up to the core project, and they receive all of the updates from the core project into the Nero project. And the Nero project Nero is basically Open Harmony, the open source HarmonyOS. so Open Harmony, and they're building some additional pieces on top. So I think this is kind of an interesting model that you could get to a place where you have variations and flavors of the core operating system with additions on top. And you and I spoke a few episodes ago about an open source model where you have core and then people can layer stuff on top. And I think it kind of follows that direction.
The Onira also solves another problem. We can't talk about really Chinese tech and Huawei without some controversy about scandals and spy accusation and things like that. I have no idea if those are true or not, but when you talk about Huawei, that's what people think, especially in Europe. The Onira project does solve that problem somewhat. There's a kind of trust issue. Do I want to put some code directly from Huawei into my phone? I personally have no problem with that. I don't really believe all of those things, but this is up to everybody to make up their own mind. But when the Onira project, which is Eclipse Foundation, which is a European foundation nowadays, takes the code base and they have any code that's coming from Onira, it doesn't come straight from Huawei. All of the code is open and they can check it, and you can check it. And there's not going to be like a secret injection from Huawei into the Onira project. There's code coming from Huawei, but it comes open and it comes reviewable.
Absolutely.
So, which I think is relevant or important, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, I think to engage, I mean, there's a challenge, right? To engage with a developer community outside of China is going to be a challenge, right? Because you're going to build up a huge body of knowledge and activity inside of China that can't be moved around, right? It sort of sticks with your domestic market. And if you think back to what Google have done, they've invested huge amounts of money and time in building developer relations, conferences. There was Google I/O where people would get flown out there, and huge investments to push Android out to developer communities around the world. So I think that's got to take place at some point if this is going to be an international play. I think there's coming back to this idea of how do you build a third ecosystem. It's a massive, massive challenge. I don't think there's a clear picture of how that's going to work. The model currently that I see from HarmonyOS in China is let's build another version of the same app. We can get into some other technologies that they're trying to use to make that easier, but it's still another binary that gets built and put into a different store. At some point, I suppose, maybe we'll get away from that model. There isn't a solution to that. Right?
For sure. I think that there's one last kind of topic I would like to discuss. It's a little bit adjacent, but I think it's worth thinking about. We talk in Europe, and we kind of want to have a European operating system, whatever it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be Onira, HarmonyOS, might be. We don't know yet. The mobile Linux is difficult, non-Google Android, all of those kind of things are in the air, and we don't know where it's going to go. But one thing that we can definitely learn from the Huawei approach is the strong inner market in China. And that's what we should be trying to do here as well. Europe needs to become strong in the market for European products, and we need to learn from what they've done there. Maybe it's not replicable one-to-one, but we can learn the lessons at least.
I think that's it. I think you start with a smaller market and not a global market. China's not got any small markets in China, right? They're all huge, right? I mean, the Chinese market alone is 3 times bigger than the European market would be. So you got to start with an identified market. I personally believe from a European perspective, especially when it comes to like open source for Europe, there's nothing wrong in it for being used outside of Europe. But if it's designed and built for Europe and European context, make it open, make it usable by others, but keep it focused. And I think that's what's got to happen if we want to go this route and sort of de-Google or have alternatives away from Apple or whatever. We've got to have something that satisfies just our European market. There's some kind of hooks into that, right? I think payments got to be a massive hook. If you can get a smooth and easy payment solution going through the phones and other devices, that would make a lot of sense. I think there's stuff about digital identity that's coming up in the EU that would make a whole lot of sense. I think there's a whole lot of topics around security in general. The Cyber Resilience Act, the CRA, is coming online. So that's certifying products for being safe for consumers to use in Europe. There's a lot of things that we could do to make a European focused set of products and mobile ecosystem and device ecosystem. And maybe if we start thinking at a kind of device level rather than just a phone level, that would put us into thinking in a different way as well. And in some ways, doesn't matter whether the app is an APK or not. Not really. I don't think customers really care. Customers care about the utility of the thing that they're using. It can't look completely out. This has been a problem on Linux desktop for a long time, is that you've got apps that just don't fit with all the other apps, and it's not a great experience. I mean, already on the Open Harmony world, you can have Android apps can be run. I mean, they're not officially supported, but people have got things like that running. There's a project to get Electron apps running. There's a project to support React Native to run in there. There's a project to support Flutter to run in there. So if you start to think of the operating system and the device ecosystem as a kind of container for applications, rather than being the thing that dictates how to write the application, then I think we start to get into a different model. And then that's a model where you're like, actually, let's have companies reuse all of the investment in Android that they made, or hey, let's take something that's web-based and make that really easy to deploy as an app-like experience with PWAs or something like that. I think there are a lot of things that can be done to create much sort of wider adoption of a device and an operating system.
That sounds good. I think this is a good place to wrap up for this week. I think we're going to return into this topic later on.
Yeah, I mean, just the last few words. I mean, this year, I've kind of stepped out a little bit of being actively working on the Open Harmony and the Nero space. I think that there's stuff coming. I think it's just a matter of getting the timing right and seeing when market's going to open up. But I think it's something to keep an eye on. Even if there's sort of no imminent sort of releases or devices coming to the market, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on, because this is not going to go away. And I think it's going to form a really important part of devices coming from China.
Sounds good. Thanks for all the insights. Super interesting to hear
Cool.
what you think. And let's return to the topic later on.
No problem.
Thanks.
We got a cat in joining the episode just at the last part. But there you go.
Well done. Cool.
We'll invite him as an official guest next time. See you next time.